Scholars didn't recognize how extensively the manuscripts of the New Testament were different from one another until the early 18th century. The major breakthrough came in the year 1707 with a publication of an edition of the Greek New Testament by an Oxford scholar named John Mill, who's, I think, unrelated to the later Victorian scholar John Stuart Mill. John Mill, in the early 18th century, he had actually spent 30 years of his life, spent 30 years comparing the Greek manuscripts that were available to him. He also looked at the ancient translations of the New Testament into other languages, Latin and Syriac and Coptic, ancient versions of the New Testament, to see what their text said at different places. And he looked at how the New Testament was quoted by church fathers to see what their manuscripts must have looked like in their own day. Mill compiled the results of his collations of these manuscripts, and he published an edition of the New Testament in 1707 that included an apparatus of variant readings that he had discovered. In other words, he printed the text, and then underneath the text he indicated places where he had found differences among the manuscripts. He only included the differences that he found to be significant. He didn't include everything that he found, only the differences in the manuscripts that he considered to be significant. To the shock and dismay of many of his contemporaries, Mill's apparatus indicated 30,000 places of variation among the manuscripts of the New Testament. 30,000 places where the manuscripts that he had examined differed from one another in their wording of the text. And remember, these are only the places that he thought were significant. A number of Mill's readers were outraged by the publication of this apparatus, and some of the more pious claimed that Mill was working to render the text of Scripture uncertain. Mill's defenders pointed out that Mill hadn't invented these places of variation. He had simply noticed that they existed, so he really couldn't be blamed for doing anything wrong. But 30,000 places of variation, that sounds fairly significant. And yet, scholars since the early 18th century have discovered many, many more variant readings among our surviving manuscripts, as manuscripts continue to be discovered even down till today. Today, people are still discovering manuscripts. Mill had examined about 100 manuscripts of the New Testament. Today, we have well over 5,000. We have 50 times more manuscripts than he had. So how many variant readings do we know about? How many places of variation survive to our knowledge? Well, the reality is no one knows how many variant readings there are among the manuscripts of the New Testament, because nobody has yet been able to count them all. Even with computers at this point, we still don't know. Some people put the number at 200,000, some say 300,000. I'm not sure how many there are, but perhaps it's easiest to put the number in comparative terms. There are more variants in our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. There's a lot of variation.